December 17th, 2024. A halfway house in Cape Coral, Florida. A man who once controlled one of the most feared cocaine empires in American history suddenly collapses. His name, Rayful Edmond III, 60 years old. 3 decades inside federal prisons, less than a year away from freedom. The paramedics arrive fast. Too late. The man known on the streets as the Babe Ruth of crack is dead. But the chaos surrounding his name didn't die with him, because decades earlier, his closest friend betrayed him. And after that betrayal, hundreds of people would be pulled into federal cases, violent turf wars, and a criminal network that reshaped an entire city. What investigators uncovered next shocked even veteran detectives. And this story doesn't begin with his death. It begins with power. The origins. Crime was the business. Long before the headlines, Washington, D.C. was already changing. In neighborhoods where government buildings stood blocks away from poverty, drugs became currency. Families survived on side hustles. Some crossed legal lines. Others erased them entirely. Rayful grew up inside that contradiction. On paper, his parents were government employees. Behind closed doors, prosecutors would later argue narcotics moved through the home. This mattered, because for Rayful, crime wasn't rebellion. It was infrastructure. By his late teens, he allegedly understood supply chains, packaging, and street distribution better than most adults. There was another factor investigators later emphasized: charisma. Teachers remembered confidence. Friends remembered ambition. Dealers remembered opportunity. And once he stepped into the cocaine trade, that combination accelerated everything. But this was only the beginning. The rise. Building an empire faster than anyone expected. The mid-1980s crack explosion transformed American cities overnight. Demand skyrocketed. Supply chains expanded. Violence followed. Rayful didn't just participate. He organized. Prosecutors would later claim his network moved massive quantities of cocaine every month, generating millions weekly. Young sellers worked shifts. Lookouts monitored police movement. Street corners functioned like storefronts. Detectives described something unusual. This didn't look like a loose gang. It looked like a corporation. Territory was mapped. Product flow was scheduled. Communication used codes. Loyalty was rewarded with money, cars, and protection. So the message was simple. Efficiency equals power. And in Washington, D.C., power meant visibility. Lines of buyers stretched down blocks. Rival crews watched carefully. Law enforcement began documenting patterns instead of isolated arrests. What the public didn't know was how quickly influence spreads when money floods a neighborhood. Rayful paid bills, sponsored local activities, helped families. At the same time, violence tied to the drug trade surged across the city. 2 realities existed at once: provider, threat. That contradiction would define his legacy. The machine. How the organization operated, investigators later described the structure as layered. At the bottom were street sellers, young, replaceable, constantly rotating. Above them were supervisors who controlled specific blocks. Couriers handled cash movement and supply transfers. Trusted lieutenants enforced discipline. Recruitment relied on proximity. Friends, family, neighborhood connections. Trust mattered more than experience. Money flow moved fast. Cash rarely stayed in one place. Vehicles, properties, and intermediaries allegedly helped hide profits. Weapons entered the equation as territory became contested. Because once a network controls major distribution zones, rivals inevitably respond. Detectives testified that coded language and lookout systems made traditional surveillance difficult. Some areas used warning signals, radios, and children acting as spotters. It forced law enforcement to treat the operation like organized crime instead of street dealing. And with scale came attention. Authorities weren't just investigating drugs anymore. They were mapping influence. But every empire contains its weak point. In this case, it was trust. Community influence. The dual identity. The late 1980s, Rayful's name carried weight beyond the drug trade. Residents described generosity. Police reports described escalation. He allegedly paid rent for struggling families, handed out cash, supported youth sports. The gestures built loyalty and silence. At the same time, Washington, D.C.'s homicide rate surged during the crack era. Turf disputes intensified. Rival dealers disappeared. Witnesses hesitated. The city became a national symbol of the crisis. And within that storm, Rayful represented something complicated, a local figure both admired and feared. This dual identity is common in organized crime history. Power fills gaps where institutions fail. But power also creates consequences. Eventually, one moment would shift everything. The turning point. Betrayal from the inside. April 1989. Federal agents prepare coordinated raids. They weren't targeting a few dealers. They were targeting an entire network. Wiretaps, financial tracking, and cooperating witnesses had been building for months. Investigators believed they finally had the structure mapped. Then came the betrayal. One of Rayful's childhood friends, someone who knew the operation intimately, agreed to testify. The impact was immediate. Internal conversations, cash storage, supply routes, information only insiders possessed. But it didn't stop there. Another key associate, a woman trusted with logistics and money, allegedly recorded conversations while cooperating with authorities. For detectives, it was the breakthrough they needed. For the organization, it was collapse in slow motion. Because once trust disappears, operations fracture, and law enforcement moved fast. Law enforcement response, a historic case. The federal response was unprecedented for Washington, D.C. at the time. Anonymous juries, enhanced security, massive evidence collections. Authorities treated the case as a major organized crime prosecution. Multiple family members and associates were charged. Financial records detailed enormous cash movement. Testimony described an operation that blurred the line between street network and criminal enterprise. The trial didn't just target one man. It targeted a system. When the verdict arrived, the sentence reflected that scale, life without parole. Most believed the story ended there. But what authorities discovered next shocked even veteran prosecutors. From prison, investigators later alleged Rayful remained connected to drug activity through phone communications and intermediaries. Another case followed. Another conviction. More years added. The empire had fallen on the streets, but the influence hadn't completely disappeared. And then came the most unexpected twist. The fall. Becoming an informant. Cornered by additional charges, Rayful made a decision that reshaped his reputation. He cooperated. For years, he provided information on trafficking networks, violent cases, and coded communications. Prosecutors credited his cooperation with numerous indictments and convictions. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of defendants linked to investigations. Dozens of cases strengthened. Cold homicides revisited. On the streets, the reaction was predictable. The kingpin had become a snitch. For some, it was survival. For others, betrayal layered on top of betrayal. Inside prison, cooperation carries its own risks. Protection measures increased. Isolation became part of daily life. But the cooperation continued for decades, which created a question that followed him until death. Was it remorse or strategy? The answer remains debated. Release, freedom that almost happened. After more than 3 decades behind bars, legal shifts and cooperation eventually reduced his sentence. In 2024, he was transferred to a halfway house, a step toward freedom few believed he would see. Videos surfaced online. He smiled, spoke about returning, looked older, but alive. Communities remained divided, and some remembered violence, others remembered help. Many questioned whether redemption was possible after that scale of damage. The system itself faced scrutiny. How should society measure change after decades? Can cooperation outweigh harm? Who decides? Before those questions could be answered, the story ended abruptly. 4.5 months later, he was dead. Aftermath. The legacy that refuses to settle. Rayful Edmond's legacy exists in numbers and contradictions. A network that helped define an era of American drug history. A prosecution that reshaped how authorities targeted large street organizations. A cooperation period that influenced hundreds of cases. Neighborhoods once tied to open-air drug markets transformed over time. New buildings replaced old corners, but memory doesn't redevelop as easily as real estate. For some residents, he represents devastation. For others, a product of systemic failure. For investigators, a case study in power, loyalty, and collapse. And the central theme remains betrayal. The question that remains in crime history. The most powerful figures rarely leave clear legacies. They leave impact. Rayful Edmond III changed how law enforcement approached drug networks. He influenced street culture, policy debates, and prison reform conversations. But his story also exposes something deeper. How easily loyalty becomes leverage. How quickly power becomes isolation. How systems create figures they later punish. He died months before freedom, suspended between past and possibility. And maybe that's why his story continues to haunt discussions about crime and justice. Because the real question isn't whether he was a villain or a product. It's whether the environment that created him ever truly disappeared. If this story made you think, drop your perspective below. Was this a story about power, betrayal, or the system itself? Subscribe for more deep investigations into criminal networks, hidden power structures, and the stories behind the headlines. Because the next case might change how you see everything.